Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Finance and Physical Resources Committee meeting. Today's date is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2015. The time is 8:30 a.m. Earlier, we met to do a work session on our facility space study needs at 7:30, and now we're moving into our formal session of our meeting. So I'll begin today with public comment. Is there any public comment? If so, please come to the podium and state your name and your address. Okay, I see none, so we'll move next to the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Vandermolen to approve that. Is there support?
Support.
Commissioner Morgan supported. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next, we have an action request by Community Development.
This is a request to recommend to the Board of Commissioners to approve the Housing and Community Development Annual Action Plan for July 1, 2015 through June 30, 2016, to authorize the board chair or designee to sign all documents related to the plan and to appropriate $2.3 million in estimated revenues to the 2015-16 Community Development Block Grant, Home, and ESG programs contingent upon award and execution of a contract. The county is qualified as an urban county, which makes it eligible to receive funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for its 34th year as an entitlement community. The 5-year extended consolidated plan for July 1, 2011 through June 30, 2016 consists of a needs assessment, market analysis, and related goals and objectives, and as a prerequisite of obtaining Community Development Block Grant, Home, and Emergency Solutions Grant funding from HUD. The grant application, referred to as the Annual Action Plan, contains a description and budget for CDBG and home-funded activities proposed to be undertaken between July 1, 2015 and June 30, 2016, including Community Development Block Grant projects requested by the 32 local units of government. The application seeks $2.33 million in funding. That includes community development funding of $1.5 million, home funding of $651,000, and ESG funding of $135,400, and recognizes an additional $45,000 anticipated as income from the CDBG Housing Rehabilitation Program.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Mast. Is there support?
Support.
By Commissioner Vandermolen. Are there questions or comments? Okay, I see none, so we'll call the question. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next, we move to another action request by Community Development.
This is a request to recommend to the board to approve agreements granting community development block grant funds to certain agencies for services eligible to eligible residents, and authorize the board chair and or designee to sign the agreements. As part of the Community Development Block Grant Program, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has allocated entitlement funds to the Community Development Department for services to eligible residents of participating urban county communities. The Community Development Department proposes agreements with the following agencies for a term to begin July 1, 2015 and end June 30, 2016. Arbor Circle, $10,000. Fair Housing Center, $40,000. Home Repair Services, almost $123,000. Hope Network, $124,000. Senior Neighbors, $51,000. And Senior Meals Program, $35,000. The Assistant Corporate Counsel has reviewed and approved the agreements as to form.
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Voorhees, is there support?
Support.
Commissioner Morgan, questions or comments? Commissioner Mast.
Why are these listed separately or differently than the other CDBG that's in the first action plan we took?
The first action plan is the overall plan. It's the overall plan.
Right.
Now we're getting into more specific detail on award of contracts.
Okay, but a lot of those. So are some of these listed in this whole list that we have in the first one? I'm kind of glancing through it here.
The first one is the plan itself.
Right.
The next one, the next series are more specifically related to the plan.
They're the agreements.
They're the agreements. With the agencies, I think there might be some with local units of government as well.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Bukowski?
Just in the resolution contract with North Kent Transit Services and Hope Network, it lists that services to eligible seniors, individuals with disabilities, and low to moderate income citizens. I thought that it's only for people with disabilities and seniors, that folks without those labels, so to speak, they don't serve those folks anymore within North Kent Services, Transportation Services.
Good morning, Linda Likely, our director.
Good morning. They do serve the elderly and the disabled, and I think at the last meeting that we were at, some of the groups chose to serve those who are low to moderate income.
Okay,
Okay.
so that was added back.
Yes.
Any other questions? I'm seeing none, so we'll call the question. Thank you, Linda. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We move to another action item for community development, item number 6.
This is a request to recommend to the board to approve the contracts with Community Rebuilders and Dwelling Place of Grand Rapids for Continuum of Care Program, accept and appropriate $1.4 million to the 2015-2016 Shelter Plus Care Fund from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and authorize the board chair to sign the documents. As part of the Continuum of Care program, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has awarded funds to the county for sponsor-based rental assistance and tenant-based rental assistance for homeless persons. The Continuum of Care program is designed to link rental assistance to supportive services for hard-to-serve homeless individuals and families. The Community Development Department recommends contracting with Community Rebuilders and the Dwelling Place of Grand Rapids to administer the supportive housing components of the Continuum of Care program. The contracts, if approved, commit $134,000 to Dwelling Place for SRA housing assistance, $198,000 to Community Rebuilders for SRA housing assistance, $822,000 to Community Rebuilders for TRA housing assistance. The contract period is July 1, 2015 to June 30th, 2016, and Assistant Corporate Counsel has reviewed and approved the agreement as to form.
I would so move.
We have a motion by Commissioner Mast. Support by Vice Chair Hennessy. Are there questions or comments? Commissioner Voorhees.
Thank you, Chair Salfeld. Community Rebuilders, how long have they been active? Linda? Good morning. Community Rebuilders, just that this contract is only 2 entities, but
Those are 2 that have been active since I've been here with this contract. That was an agreement when we first began the Shelter Plus Care program, and HUD did the selection, and those are the 2 groups that were selected to provide these services. And so HUD continues each year with contracts with these same groups.
is that open for bid or for opportunities to other entities?
Not these 2. There is a process that goes through the Continuum of Care where we do have an opportunity for, based on our scoring, for new projects to participate, but not in this category. Those are funds that are automatically reallocated every year to those 2 groups for those activities.
Automatically designated by HUD?
Yes, by HUD.
Commissioner Mast.
Good morning, Linda. Has there been is there a gradual increase in some of these, or what's the history of these? Are they going up or down?
Those went up a little bit this year, but down in previous years.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Hennessy.
That was part of my question. Now, if anybody, these funds are to locate or to help people with housing that would be outside of the city of Grand Rapids or outside of Wyoming because they operate their own programs.
No, for these specific funds, we allocate those funds to Community Rebuilders and Dwelling Place. Dwelling Place has project-based vouchers, and so those vouchers stay with the project, and they're at, they've just changed this year to the new Ferguson complex. So they stay with the project, and they're housing those who are really hard to house. Community Rebuilders houses countywide, and it does not exclude Grand Rapids or Wyoming for these funds.
Okay, so the funds can be used within these other municipalities that have their own programs too?
Yes, for
Okay,
these
thanks.
specific funds, they can be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you again, Linda, and we'll call the question. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
That motion passes. We next have agenda item number 7, which is another action request by Community Development.
This is a request to recommend to the board to approve the monitoring services subrecipient agreement between the Kent County Community Development Department and the City of Wyoming, to authorize the board chair and/or county administrator to sign the agreement and necessary documents for submission to HUD, and to accept and appropriate $4,000 in estimated revenues to the 2015-2016 Community Development Block Grant Fund from the City of Wyoming, contingent upon execution of a contract. Federal law requires the Community Development Block Grant grantees to monitor subrecipient activities for program compliance in accordance with applicable federal requirements, and that program objectives are achieved. The City of Wyoming has been very satisfied with the monitoring services performed by the Community Development Department during the last 4 years, and is desirous of extending the services for a period of July 1, 2015 through June 30, 2016. The 5 nonprofit agencies that are to be monitored include the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan, Home Repair Services of Kent County, Compassion This Way, Salvation Army Social Services, and Habitat for Humanity. Benefits to the City of Wyoming include timely, accurate, and HUD-compliant subrecipient monitoring that would not otherwise be possible for the existing staffing levels. Benefits to the county include cost sharing of required monitoring procedures for the 2 common subrecipients. This cooperative effort is in line with the board's consolidation of services priority. The proposed agreement outlines the scope of work and responsibilities of the parties. While the county will perform the city's monitoring services, the city will remain accountable for the overall administration and compliance requirements. All costs associated with the monitoring function will be paid by the City of Wyoming, which is estimated to not exceed $4,000 for the year 2015-16. The agreement has been reviewed and approved as to form by Assistant Corporate Counsel.
So moved.
We have a motion by Commissioner Voorhees. Is there support?
Support.
By Commissioner Volkowski. Questions or comments? I see none. That's why I'm glad you read those.
Yeah, I know.
All right, we'll call the question then. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next, we move to agenda item number 8, which is an action request by DHHS Child Fund Care.
This
Child
is-
Care Fund, I'm sorry.
This is a request to recommend to the board to approve a contract between Kent County and the Salvation Army Booth Services to support precariously housed families involved in the child welfare system. The Kent County, Michigan's Department of Health and Human Services, the 17th Circuit Court, Network 180, and 5 private agencies in the county are partnering to create the state's first performance-based child welfare system. As part of this effort, state law streamlined funding between the DHHS and Kent County. It also created $1.7 million in annual investment in the provision of in-home services for families. During a data and program review, one of the issues to be addressed with funding was the number of children removed or at risk of removal because of living in precariously housed situation with individuals that have a history of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence. Further, there was not a program or funding available to relocate families into safe housing situations. And in this case, precariously housed means doubled up with another family or families. The Essential Needs Task Force and its Coalition to End Homelessness, DHHS, the court, and several private agencies have been meeting to discuss potential solutions to the problem. One solution identified was to utilize the community's housing access program, which is operated by Booth Family Services, to conduct a housing assessment and partner with a housing agency to provide appropriate housing and case management. Request for proposal was issued by the Coalition to End Homelessness to determine the housing agency partners. The review panel selected community rebuilders to partner with Booth Family Services in this pilot program. DHHS and the Coalition to End Homelessness will be reviewing the pilot program, looking at 2 key data points: preventing placement of children in out-of-home care and keeping families out of homeless shelters. The agreement has been reviewed and approved to form by Assistant Corporate Counsel.
So moved.
Commissioner Morgan provided the motion. Is there support?
Support.
Commissioner Mass. Questions or comments? Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wayman, what strikes me is the state's first performance-based child welfare system. Do we have the data collection ability, and how is this going to roll out and be audited?
Let's have Matthew Vanzetti.
Hi, Matthew.
I figured it'd be Matthew.
So just to make sure I understand the question, data system for the child welfare system,
Right.
and then also auditing, questions about that, right?
Right.
So data, one of the key attributes that we're looking at in the performance-based funding model is how to collect data and what are the outcomes we're going to be achieving. So the state is doing their data reviews right now on past data sets of kids in the child welfare system to look at areas they want to see improvement upon. There's a series of meetings actually right now going on. They were yesterday and through this week talking about that to start negotiating that master contract and what data points we will be reviewing. So that's in progress right now. But one of the key things we know is that we need to do a better job of keeping children out of the system. Because once you enter into the child welfare system, it's very hard to be returned home to your parents, your family. And we can do more to strengthen families when, with services together. So this is an attempt to do that, is to keep families together. Because so often when a child is, CPS is doing an investigation, and if a child is living with somebody who has a history of domestic violence or has been abused, is on the central registry for abuse and neglect, state policy says that those children should be removed from that situation. Unfortunately, when you're living with another family because of your economic circumstances, and you're doubled up in a house, and it might not be your mom or your dad who's on those registries, but your living partners right now to make ends meet, you're still liable as a parent to make sure your child is safe. And so what this is going to do is hopefully provide an assistance to that family to be removed out of that potentially dangerous living situation into their own place, and then you provide case management for that family to ensure safety for the child, so that they're not placed into a foster care situation unnecessarily. How this will be audited is we're going to look at data points, and we're actually working with the department right now to figure out how to make sure that the data points for this are set up. So children we intervene with in this program, do they enter back into the child welfare system at a later point, or are we able to keep them out of the foster care system? So this is a pilot. The state's been investing in something called SACWIS. You might be reading about that often in MERS or other places, My SACWIS. It's a tool that we'll be having to mine for data to do this. So we have that system. And then we also have what's called the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, that looks at homeless shelter and people in the homeless shelter community. And we're going to be looking at whether these children, if the intervention's not successful and they end up in a shelter because they can't keep their apartment, that's also a bad outcome. So we'll be monitoring that as well. So this is clearly a pilot. We're trying something new. We're going to evaluate it, do a learning community to see if it's successful or not before we would renew contracts or do anything like that.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's very helpful. Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Sounds like you've been working with the state, and this is another program they're looking to the county for assistance on, because we do a lot of performance-based programs.
Right, yep. Yeah, we're definitely a leader in trying to figure a solution out to this in the system. You know, we have Saveda here from the department today who's been actively in discussions with us. The Homeless Coalition, we have Jessica Vale, who's the coordinator, and Tracy Kaufman from ENTF. This has been an ongoing project with our housing providers too. So this is a pilot. Like, I really do want to stress that this is a test to see if something works, and we really need to come back with these data points.
Well, good luck with your outcomes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mass.
Yeah, I think this is really a commendable thing. So essentially, if you compare this to the Housing First approach for adults, this is basically really providing a lot of wraparound services, not simply removing the children from the home, but trying to improve the home situation in their present housing situation.
Or move them out of their current housing situation to it's the Housing First model specifically, to move them to a house and then provide the wraparound services at their housing location and the supports that they need. Yep, you're exactly right.
Yeah. So where are the schools with this? I don't see schools listed as part of the partners, because there's a lot of these children that are in schools that get picked up, that get identified as at-risk children.
Yeah, the schools have not been part of this discussion or dialogue at this point. KSSN.
Yeah, KSSN must pick a lot of that up then. Yeah.
Well, there are some schools that are benefiting from the Kent School Services Network model, which also is a collaborator, if you will, within this Health and Human Services system. So some of this will intersect with KSSN. And so in those schools that have that program, they can be easily referred to this Housing First model that's being supplied. This will be another tool in their toolbox.
And then one other question, Commissioner Chair. The contract is between us and Salvation Army. That's sort of as the fiduciary, but the major responsibility lies with community rebuilders, it looks like here. Am I assessing that?
You're correct. HUD requires something called the HARA, which is a central access point for homeless services. Years ago, the Community Booth Family Services was selected as the HARA, or HAP is the acronym locally. We worked with the providers to look at opportunities for them more to participate, but because of case levels and hiring practices, they needed to be guaranteed a certain level of referrals if this was going to be successful. So that was the RFP process that was referenced in the action request, and the review panel for the Coalition to End Homelessness selected Community Rebuilders to be the partner. So that process was followed in RFP process. So.
Yeah, this is a
Commissioner Voorhees.
good program.
Well, mine is of less the thing, it's under miscellaneous, Matt, in this contract. Force majeure. Who is force majeure? Or what? Legal, what, I can see what it does, but I hadn't seen those two words together.
It's a Latin term that's
I figured.
used to describe conditions beyond your control, sometimes referred to as acts of God.
Well, I know them,
It's
yeah.
another ambulance term.
I've been married 57 years, I know what it is, force majeure.
The
Oh, you were
fact
very
that, the fact that you
deflective.
don't know what that means help keeps lawyers in business.
That's right.
And that's why we keep
Commissioner Bukowski.
Thank you, and definitely, Matthew, thank you for the hard work that this represents, and not only you, but the team that's been doing a lot of work on this and the negotiations with the state. My tiny nit is under the policies and guidelines, the system neutral advocates. And I understand and I support that in the sense of building the trust with the families. However, what happens when the advocate is a social worker by trade and you have the mandatory reporting aspects? I mean, what happens in that situation?
It's a great question. I really don't know the answer to that. To be honest with you, I'll have to get back to you on that because, yeah, I'm not sure. I know that was discussed between Department of Human Services and Tracy Kaufman, the NTF, and the group, but I will look into that and get you an answer back.
All right, thank you.
Vice Chair Hennessy.
Commissioner Morgan was asking more, about details of the accountability and the numbers and what happens. And I would like that as well. This, if you remove a child, that then ties into the foster care system, which is part of this whole test type of thing that we're doing for the state. And so I'd really like to see that, more follow-up on the numbers. And the goal of this, in terms of preventing placement of children in out-of-home care, I mean, I strongly support that. And even if we're doing it at this point for the people who are really the most frail, where they don't have solid housing options, but there are, other families that may have solid housing options but still need that emphasis on keeping the placement and keeping the family together wherever possible. And that has been my concern. It's been my concern, and increasingly is my concern, that we work where possible. You're always afraid of having that aberrant case where it's going to backfire on you, but overall, to keep families together.
Commissioner Hennessy, I'd just like to say thanks for those comments. A group of us went to Florida to look at a performance-based modeling system in the greater Tampa area a month ago, and I think that was one of the key learnings that came back is the in-home prevention services and getting those involved sooner, faster, with more supports to ensure that we can strengthen families where they're at instead of removing children. And so I know there's been lots of discussions going on with that. And I would also just say that this board, this county commission, provides a lot of in-home care funding. Should be commended for that because you're putting funding into it. And so we're working to try to make sure that those funds are used appropriately. And so as an ongoing discussion topic. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Matt.
I just have one follow-up. Daryl, we've got a page that's attached to this action request that I can't understand why it's there. It's got
like the DDAs.
It's got listing all the township jurisdictions with the,
I think that was an error. I'm not sure why that was there
okay.
in the packet, so we apologize.
Because the whole, this is all the background,
Yeah.
which is helpful. Yeah, okay. Just discard that. I didn't know what it was for.
Please disregard that.
Careful what you give us.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Good work.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Raymond and Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
your hard work.
Continue with care, people.
Next, we have agenda item number 9, which is an action request by Public Works.
This is a request to recommend to the Board of Commissioners to adopt a solid waste management ordinance to implement portions of the Kent County Solid Waste Management Plan, to establish conditions for solid waste hauler licenses, to provide an incentive to recycle, to preserve and improve the environment, and to establish a countywide regulatory surcharge to fund the cost of implementing portions of the county's solid waste management program, specifically the cost of maintaining, managing, and remediating closed county landfills and operating the county's household hazardous waste program, and to approve the associated fee schedule for the ordinance if approved. Pursuant to board action on May 2nd, 1979, and state law, the Board of Public Works serves as the designated solid waste planning agency for the county. In 2010, the DPW identified the need for additional funding for monitoring and remediation of the North Kent landfill and the former municipally owned Sparta and Kentwood landfills, which were acquired by the county as part of a countywide solid waste management program. Records indicate that waste from throughout the entire county was disposed of in each of these facilities prior to closure. The Solid Waste Planning Committee was convened to prepare and recommend an amendment to the Solid Waste Management Plan to address the shortfall After consideration of other mechanisms, the committee recommended a plan amendment to allow the county to enact an ordinance establishing a solid waste surcharge and waste hauler licensing program. By statute, such an ordinance must be enabled by the plan. The amendment to the plan was approved by the Board of Public Works on October 4th, 2012, by the Board of Commissioners on November 8th, 2012, and by the required local, 2/3 of the local units by March 2013. A proposed ordinance was recommended by the Board of Public Works in August of 2014. The proposed ordinance was presented to the standing committees of the board in November of 2014 and received considerable public comment. Action was delayed to allow Public Works staff time to address the concerns that were raised. A new proposed ordinance was recommended by the BPW on May 7th of this year. Additional revisions were proposed during a work session before the Board of Commissioners on May 28th. Pursuant to the ordinance, the amount of the surcharge and license application fee must be established by the resolution of the Board of Commissioners. The proposed surcharge fees are 14 cents per household per month for residential service and 11 cents per uncompacted container yard and 56 cents per compacted container yard, or $1.61 per ton for institutional waste each time the container is tipped and hauled. The proposed waste hauler licensing application fee is $30 per vehicle.
Motion to support.
So moved.
Commissioner Vandermolen, is there support?
Support.
Commissioner Bulkowski. Are there questions or comments? Commissioner Morgan.
I just have a process question. I'm not clear. We had previously an ordinance passed by this committee. This supersedes that action, and what happened to the other ordinance that we had in front of us?
I don't think,
The one that was before this committee?
Yes.
That one was never acted
Never
on
acted.
by the board.
I understand, so that one just
goes away.
goes away.
Vice Chair Hennessy?
I'm not finding it today, but we're referring, on the bills, it'll be Kent County's, a surcharge. I'm wondering why we don't call it a landfill maintenance surcharge to somehow describe what it is, why we're making this as a surcharge.
Yeah, Darbas is the director and can answer your question.
Good morning, everyone. What we attempted to do is to provide a description that would fit within kind of the limitations of some of the software that the haulers have, so we call it a county surcharge. If they choose to call it I have to look back at the ordinance, the Kent County Legacy Fund, or however it's written, I can look in the ordinance here in a minute. But the intent was to provide a succinct description so that it wasn't burdensome on those that would put it on a bill, which is why it's called county surcharge. I mean, we can change that. That was just recommended by council in terms of a way to describe it on a bill.
I agree with that.
I'll say it sounded prescriptive, like, a required wording, the way I had read it. But I'm not looking at it right now, but it's that's the impression I kind of had. And we, through things like our, 911 system and the phone charges, we work with the various companies, and they put it on our bills. The objection, there has been the objection raised here that we're making the haulers put it on the bills and make it very specific to us. But I see this as having a precedent in the way in which we've done other things like the 911 system. And can you just generally comment on that aspect of the objections being raised?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Dan DeWitt, outside counsel, because he worked extensively on that piece for us.
On your first question, to be a little more detailed about why we did it the way we did. The surcharge pays for not just the legacy landfill, but also the household hazardous waste program. That gets to be a pretty long description on the bill. And then we were told by certain waste haulers that their billing system only allows them 16 characters that they can use to put on their bill without making a pretty substantial change to their software. So if you count out the number of letters on county surcharge, you'll see it matches to 16 characters, so it's just all we had, unfortunately.
And I just want to comment, I applaud the efforts that you have made to work with the waste, the industry. That's just a good example of, you know, of that having been done, and I do appreciate that, because I know we've had different resolutions in front of us, and we've gone back primarily to work with them, so I do really appreciate that. Commissioner Mass.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. So there was an appointed solid waste management subcommittee or something, which was made up of a lot of waste haulers. Is that whole committee supportive of this ordinance?
The committee did approve the ordinance. There's 4 waste haulers that serve on that committee that's required by the state of Michigan on the Solid Waste Planning Committee or Solid Waste Management Planning Committee. They had input during that time, not that they always necessarily agreed with everything, but there was a stakeholder process that took a number of years. Committees met for months. There were multiple meetings, multiple years worth of meetings to finally kind of get to this point last fall when it was brought to the Board of Commissioners. Then we met with the industry again this year, a series of 5 more meetings to try to iron out and make the ordinance more workable from their perspective. That went back to the Solid Waste Planning Committee for review in April prior to bringing it back to our Board of Public Works in May. So we continue to follow the process of review by the stakeholders in this.
Okay. Following up Commissioner Hennessy's thought or question, so I should look, or I can look sometime along the way when it starts on my bill that I get from my waste hauler. It should list it on there, but I think they also have the option of just putting it on their web page, don't they?
That's correct.
That their bill includes this, because my bill I get a quarterly. Well, I guess all of us do probably get a quarterly bill, and it's very general. So I'm curious to see what will come up in my bill.
We've tried to be as flexible as possible. We know there's various technologies out there. We know companies are everything from very, very sophisticated, like a national operating company that uses software across the country, and we know that there's more local haulers that use less sophistication in that way. So we wanted to be as flexible as possible, and that's something they asked for.
Well, I have waste management, and their bill is just three lines, and it just covers a whole bunch within that line, I think.
In waste management, as an example, they do have, you can go online and look at it. They have, an assist of how do you read and how do you understand your bill, and they'll show a lot of different line items to assist customers in understanding how and why they bill.
Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions for you. The first one is on the household and hazardous waste. And was there a consideration or discussion of charging at the site for that and not including it in this?
Historically, and this I think would be true across the country and certainly in the state of Michigan, counties and municipalities have always helped cover that cost for residents. Household hazardous waste by definition is not hazardous because the EPA set it outside of the rules. The reality is it is hazardous. And whether it's corrosive or toxic, a pesticide, gasoline, motor oil, all the things you can think of that you might have in your garage or in the house, it doesn't help residents, encourage them to do the right thing sometimes if there's a charge involved, especially if it's an estate or you're helping clean up mom and dad's place after they've passed away and things of that nature. So the Kent County and most of the counties that offer HHW programs in Michigan have always funded that through other mechanisms to provide residents what we consider a very important service. Last year we processed 250,000 pounds of material, and I think in the presentation from last year it's over 3 million pounds in total since we've had that program here in Kent County. And other counties around us have that too, Allegan County, Ottawa, Acosta.
I have some follow-ups if I could. Sure. When it comes to the proposed surcharge schedule, is a waste hauler, is that what they can pass through to the customer per the schedule, or if they want to charge more, if they want to charge less, is that an option?
The ordinance requires that they charge the amount that's listed, with the expectation then that that will be passed through back to the county through the disposal at the landfills or disposal facilities as we have proposed. So we're not, it would be unfair for them to collect less, it wouldn't be fair for them to collect more and not remit that. So the intent is what is charged on behalf of the county, and that fee would be remitted back to the county.
And this is more of a comment versus a question, but when I look at this, it's based on an average. So you're going to have entities who put more waste in that aren't paying enough. Then you're going to have entities who put in less that could be argued are being overcharged. Is that correct?
We met and spent a lot of time discussing that with the industry and trying to come up with what is the most fair way to approach it. Some containers are overflowing, some are less than full, some are full. It became very difficult at that point to figure out, well, how are you going to do this? So we did average it out with an assumption that the container would be full. But the charge incurred by the industry is when they go across the scale and actually pay by the ton, and that's what we've tried to do here, is be very accurate with the tonnage. We went back at an averaging of two years, 2013 and 14. We looked at all the waste generated within Kent County corporately, where it was going, how it was being disposed, and that's how we came up with the surcharge amounts. We spent a lot of time meeting with the industry, looking at averages, assumptions on how much waste is disposed of by commercial, what's compacted, what's not compacted. Those were numbers that they helped us determine.
If I could add to that a little bit. And then also there are really two true-up processes built into the ordinance to take care of that situation. The ordinance requires that every 2 years we need to take a look at our surcharges and make sure that they match up. So hopefully we'll pick up on situations like that as we work with the haulers, and we'll see if someone's saying, geez, I'm not really collecting a ton from a lot of my customers, I'm collecting less, then that's something that we can fix in that 2-year process. Also, we have every year we have a true-up process built in where a hauler can come to us and they can say, geez, we've overpaid. Now, the biggest thing that they said is we're worried about customers not paying the surcharge, so that's written right in. But the true-up process also says you can seek a refund if your customers don't pay or for other circumstances. So if a particular hauler is having a problem where they really feel like they're paying too much and they're not able to collect that, they're not able to be made whole, there are a couple provisions in here that deal with that and make sure hopefully everybody comes out pretty close to even at the end, or as close as we can get it. So.
And then just another question on the charges. So if there's an association that has individual homes, but they have a contract with the hauler, and the association collects the money for these individual homes, and there's one contract, is that an institutional or is that a residential? And how is that handled?
It depends on how the contract is written. Most contracts allow for adjustments in price for things like surcharges and other fees that governmental entities might add. I think in that circumstance it would be by the ton, and because a situation like that looks more like commercial versus a residential.
But it is a residential. There's no, the only difference is the payment goes to the association. I mean, it's still going to homes, individual homes.
Right. The ordinance says that is a tricky situation when you have residents, you have apartment buildings, condo buildings, and things like that. Basically, the way we worked that out in the ordinance is saying, if the association uses one big dumpster, everybody goes out and they put it in the dumpster, then it's an institutional situation. It needs to be charged that way. If each of those residences has their own can, that looks like a house can, then it's a residential situation. It's charged that way. And then, as Dar is alluding to in the contracts and such, typically there would be some sort of provision in there that would allow them to charge governmental surcharges and things like that, and they would just handle it through their contract. But again, too, that's also why we have the flexibility built in about how does this get charged. It doesn't have to be on a bill, or it doesn't have to be written on a bill, or things like that, because we recognize sometimes it is by contract. And so the flexibility's in there, and then they can write somewhere in that contract, or they can send them a notice and saying $1.68 per ton is the Kent County solid waste surcharge.
Just two more points, if I could. The first one is the 30 years ago when the pursuing the other entities was that waived by the county to do that? Or is that still an option open to us in the landfills?
In reading the minutes from the Board of Public Works in the past, they did not waive that option. They did leave that on the table in the resolutions, but they made the decision to absorb the liability. So I think that, I don't know realistically to pursue after this much time what that would look like legally and the cost involved, but the resolution did not preclude that from occurring.
You may have statute of limitations problems at this point of bringing in claims on those landfills after this long period of time. And the statute of limitations under the law that's driving that cleanup is called the Superfund or the CERCLA law, and the statute of limitations provisions under that are very complex. But after 30 years, I haven't looked at that situation precisely, but I would say you would have some issues.
Would we have some issues, Tom?
I have not looked at the CERCLA statute of limitations specifically either. And again, that would be something that would require some research.
Well, just my final comment is I think we can all agree on the issues that this is a problem that needs funding, and I think there are multiple solutions to this problem. Thanks.
Commissioner Wilkowski.
I mean, just a quick throw in there. We as a Board of Public Works, and both Commissioner Vandermolen and Commissioner Morgan can correct me, but we have reviewed that policy decision of a generation ago, and we continue to support it. As Drain Commissioner Weil noted, he was a county commissioner and on the Board of Public Works when that consent decree was entered into. So we continue to support that decision by the county at that time, because again, it saved millions of dollars of legal fees and engineering fees and all of that. So statute of limitations aside, the idea is this is a problem that we have to fix. My only slightly tongue-in-cheek comment of what this should be called on the bill is our grandparents' mistake surcharge. This literally is our grandparents' mistake. They took toxic waste and poured it into the ground because that's what it disappeared. How cool is that? It didn't disappear, and it continues to move all over our county underground. You know, the Kentwood Library has issues today. So I'll get off my soapbox and simply say,
Sounds like the sins of my father. Or something.
Well, but it's definitely the sins and mistakes of our fathers and our grandparents. And the county made a decision a generation ago to simply say, let's take care of it, because we all benefited from those mistakes. I mean, our entire economy benefited from that cheap disposal, and so our entire economy is going to pay for it through a surcharge before that. So anyways, we have looked at that and we'll continue to look at it. However, none of us, again, correct me if I'm wrong, none of us on the Board of Public Works has even thought of cracking that thing open. The consent decree, that is.
Okay. Commissioner Morgan?
When we get around to voting on this, may I request a roll call vote?
You may.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I just have
Mast.
one, just quick, why are we waiting till July 30 to review this or to take it to the board? That's 2 months away.
We only have one meeting in July, and we have to have a public hearing as part of the process.
Okay, so this now will go to a public hearing.
Well, it goes through the legislative committee, and then we would go.
A public
if-
hearing,
If
the
the
first-
legislative committee recommends it, then we move to the next step.
To a public hearing, the first meeting of July then, will that be?
It would be in June.
Last of June.
There's only one meeting in July.
Okay, the 30th. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? I see none. Thank you, Dar. Thank you, Dan. We'll call the question. It is a roll call vote.
Commissioner Vandermolen?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Mast?
Yes.
Commissioner Hennessy?
Yes.
Commissioner Bulkowski?
Yes.
Commissioner Voorhees?
Yes.
Commissioner Jones?
No.
Motion passes. We will now move to agenda item number 10, which is miscellaneous. Is there any commissioner miscellaneous today? I'm seeing none. I do have one item. This afternoon at 3:30, Fiscal Services Director Steve Duarte will be presenting an informational primer on the budget process in room 311. So if anybody is interested in attending that, please let Connie know today before you leave. And I see nothing else, so with that, we will adjourn at 9:20 a.m.